You know, some of them have the voice of Montreal, some of them don't, right? I'm not crazy. Jay, am I crazy? I'm not crazy. Listen, I'm going to get used to it. You just watch, folks. I'm going to get used to it. All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. Let's turn our attention to this. Quebec lost, get a load of this, over $500 million last year due to risky investments in companies like Northvolt and Recyclage Carbone Varennes, contributing to our massive $10.4 billion deficit. Now, the funds came from Quebec's main economic development tool, the FDE. Critics say the government failed to properly assess the risks. Let's talk about the losses and if they could have been avoided. Frederic Beauchemin is on the line, M&A for Marguerite-Bourgeoys and the Liberal Party of Quebec's official opposition critic on economic and innovation and finance matters. Monsieur Beauchemin, welcome back to the show.
Good morning.
Listen, if you're going to invest in companies, and governments do this left, right, and center, look at the Canadian record out there in Ottawa. It ain't the greatest either. Sometimes you make bad bets. What's your case that this goes beyond what happens when you make investments in companies and that there's actual mismanagement here?
I get the concept of a diversified portfolio for sure. But when you are the government, your role is to be responsible and to be the fiduciary of Quebecers and Canadian taxpayer money. And so it doesn't matter if Ottawa is jumping over a bridge. I don't think it allows us to do the same as well. I think what we need to do is to be responsible. And when we're looking at investment, we should look at quality investment that actually do make sense. If you take the case of Northvolt specifically, there were other alternatives that the government decided not to pursue, and they went with Northvolt. And that explains a lot of the problems that we're in with the CAC.
So I want to talk about that a bit, right? And I spoke about this at length at times on our program. I always thought that battery decision was a really odd one. If you look at the list of the dominant players in batteries for electric cars, CATL, BYD, Tesla, Panasonic, LG Chem out of South Korea, and these are the leaders. We went with a company that was not even in the top 10 of the list. And I just wonder, you know, what I've heard is, well, Elias, nobody else would have come. You know, Northvolt was one that they were going to say yes. And that's why we had to go down the list. What do you say to that? Like maybe we just weren't enticing for those who are already making their batteries in other parts of the world.
Yeah, perhaps it's part of the equation, and the result is that we were stuck with Northvolt. Perhaps that's part of it. But, you know, at the end of the day, if that's the only choices we made, we still are not obligated to jump into that pool. So in all honesty, I think at the time when the Inflation Reduction Act was put in place by the Biden administration, there was this euphoria for battery makers to, basically invest anywhere that governments were begging them to come into, whether it was in Ontario, whether it was in Quebec, or whether it was in the U.S. And, you know, FYI, there was about 6 or 7 that decided to really look at Canada, including Quebec, and there was like 180 that decided to jump into the U.S. market at the time. So on a competitive basis, we weren't really well equipped to do what, you know, Legault wanted to do. It just didn't make really financial sense to go in that direction.
At the end of the day, Northvolt has cost how much to the Quebec taxpayer? And is there any hope some other project would go in that spot and that batteries one day will be made at that site?
Well, as it relates to Northvolt, specifically, we're in the $500 million category in terms of a loss. And you know what? The technology is like the 4th, perhaps maybe the 5th technology in the world. The methodology to construct these batteries that Northvolt utilized when in Sweden actually did not work. That's the reason why they went bankrupt. So the process is no good. The product is no good. So I don't understand why the Quebec government is still insisting that it may work in Quebec. What didn't work in Sweden is not automatically going to work in Quebec. That, for me, is a false dream from the CAC government. And if there's an alternative, battery maker that could come into Quebec and take over that site, it's possible. I haven't looked at that specifically. We have some infrastructure that could be enticing. But, you know, Quebec's economy is 97.5% of it is small and medium-sized businesses. So, you know, we're taxing them with, you know, we're providing, that money that we generate from those taxes, and we're giving them to multinational from other parts of the world. From my perspective, it just doesn't make any sense. We have the technology in Quebec. If we wanted to, we could have done that. but the Quebec government decided not to go in that direction.
What changes is needed to change how Quebec evaluates investments? Does it just go basically to a government change? Is it just decisions from the top? Or are we talking about a managerial side of things where we've been making the wrong decisions?
At the end of the day, you need to actually have an investment policy that makes sense. You know, when you're managing a big book of investments, you need to know the asset classes that you want to invest into. So that's something that the government actually is terrible at. And so, you know, Investissement Québec had a return last year like 2.5%, while, you know, the stock market was up 25% last year.
Yeah.
So there's so many bad variables just indicate to me that it's not the role of the government to do that. The role of the government is to create the winning conditions for all to succeed. It's not to pick the winners, because obviously they're terrible at it.
Wrapping up with M&A, Frederic Beauchemin from the Quebec Liberal Party, talking about some of the government's bad bets. Aside from Northvolt, Mr. Beauchemin, what else should we be talking about? Well, you know, the Northvolt's got all the headlines, but are there other bad decisions that should be top of mind?
Yeah, it probably toppled close to $10 billion worth of wasted money. We could start with the electoral check. We could start with Lyon. We could start with Taiga. We could talk about the construction program for labor that they wanted to do, which had no success at all. I mean, you know, the electoral checks were like $6.7 billion. All of it totals close to $10 billion. That's like, you know, what, 6, 7 regional hospitals right there. That's like 200 schools that we could have built that maybe would have, you know, renovated all of the schools in Quebec. I just don't understand why the priorities of this government are just not focused on what's really required. It's to create the environment for the winning conditions for all of our businesses to succeed. We generate revenue from that and then turn around and apply it to, you know, infrastructure that are required for Quebec to prosper. It's, you know, management 101. Obviously, the CAQ is not good at it.
Mr. Beauchemin, I want to thank you for taking the time this morning with our listeners. Let's talk again real soon.
All right, take care. Have a good day.
Frederic Beauchemin is the M&A for Marguerite-Bourgeoys and the Quebec Liberal Party's critic on economy, innovation, and finance.